Okay, so I get to do the introduction. Our speaker today is David Pablo Cohn. It would be impossible to overstate the impact that every aspect of his work has had on my life. Because I can. He describes himself as a failed academic, came to Google in 2002 after riding 4 previous startups down into smoking craters. He finally listened to Peter Norvig's good advice and joined. Started.
So I also gave you bad advice to join another one. So.
Yeah, on average, we did okay. Started out by trying to apply machine learning to search quality, and in the subsequent 11 years bounced around nearly a dozen different teams, from spam fighting to .org. Pablo's internal Google title was Instigator at Large, and he says he's most proud of his 20% projects, one of which was creating this. Again, this is your fault. Here's the first machine learning curriculum inside Google as a 20% project, taught thousands of engineers. And the other was that he accidentally found himself in charge of Google Labs, also as a 20% project. And both of those launched without ever actually entering the official PDB. In 2010, okay, I'm going to continue this rate. In 2010, he spent his sabbatical working for the US Antarctic program at the South Pole as the help desk at the bottom of the world. Left Google in 2013 to spend more time writing and working in Antarctica. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Oh, that's all kind of fun recursive. We can watch the... Recently, as last Friday, was announced to be the winner of this year's Palo Alto short story contest. Grab this last week's copy of the weekly. There we go. That was what I was going to show off. The Instigator at Large. And he's here on the first stop of publicizing his just-released second book, a collection of short stories titled 8 in 3 Weeks and Other Early Stories, published by Montemayor Press. And I'm going to stop here because I can't think of anything I can say that he couldn't say just as well himself. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of the hat because that's just a little too silly. Okay, let's do this. Seems like it rained fire ants all afternoon that day. They dripped from the gutters in the old house and drizzled from the leaves of the sycamore that stood a little further up the mossy rise. Sometimes they just seemed to fall from the clear Missouri sky itself. I love first lines. So, for me, first lines are like that woman in the red dress who's just walked in the room, and you have no idea who she is, where she came from. You've just been plunged into a brand new world, and your brain is saying, what's going on? Is screaming for context, is screaming for clues. For me, I guess first lines are this crazy romantic invitation to fall in love. No one was willing to say for sure whether Billy Erickson's body was in the boat when they set it afire that night. I suppose it was better that way. Any certainty, one way or the other, would have raised uncomfortable questions about the disposal of human remains. And those non-committal hmms from the boys down at the shipyard seemed to give everyone enough leeway to believe that things had been resolved in a way that Billy would have appreciated. I should warn you, my stories people tend to die in my stories. I mean, not like horror fast. Yeah, they die. I kill them lovingly. So sometimes when you dive into one of these things, you're looking for long-term commitment. You want to meet a character slowly. You want to get to know them, meet the family, watch them grow up, watch their kids. If you're reading George R.R. Martin, watch them all brutally slaughtered. But you're looking for something that will last you. You're looking for 500,000 words and 1,000 pages or so. Other times you're not up for that. You really just want to dive in, have your world turned upside down, and sort of find yourself going, whoa, as you watch the taillights disappear off into the dawn, going, wow. So I think we have short stories for the same reason we have singles bars. Turns out I write short stories. I've tried a couple of novels. The Heller's Tale, the novella, is the longest thing I've actually managed to complete. But yeah, I seem to just write short stories. I come up with an idea, I go forward with it, and 3,000 words later, I'm done, and there's really nothing else I want to say about it. So the way I think this works is I start out by saying, talk a little bit about me, then I read you a story, and then I talk a little about my writing process. At least that's the way I saw the other authors' talks operate back when I was here. In fact, my last day at Google, no one knew it was my last day except for my manager and me. But it was when I helped out with the Neil Gaiman talk. And I was sitting there in the front row, and I knew I was leaving Google to sit down and write. And he was up there reading from his new book and talking about, and he gave this awesome, amazing advice. And I was thinking, there is nothing else I can imagine wanting to do right now than write stuff that would have me stand up and talk about what I've written. So here I am. Woo. Yes. Any case, so Google, I was going to be a professor. I failed, applied for faculty jobs 4 years in a row, 5 startups in 6 years, 4 smoking creators, found one I couldn't kill. My dissertation back in 1992 was on this fringe thing called machine learning. I got out too early. The dissertation was something called, developed an approach to machine learning called active learning, which, again, I got out too early, but yay. As I said, I bounced around. Oh, as my introducer said, I bounced around a bunch of teams, created the machine learning course, found myself in charge of Google Labs, and I'm not good at being in charge of things. And I tried to get in charge of it, and the only way I could get in charge of it was by going away on a sabbatical. And for various reasons, I was offered a job at the South Pole, being the help desk at the bottom of the world. That kind of gets under your skin. You either love it or you don't. I kind of loved it. So 3 years later, I left for good. Spent my time split between writing and working in Antarctica. When I started writing, I was just writing travel blog. I'd been writing travel blog for 11 or 12 years. And when I was at the South Pole, though, there was this great thing that I observed happening. And I thought, this would be really awesome if this one other thing that wasn't true were also true. But I don't know how to make stuff up. I only know how to write what I see. And I thought, someone really ought to write this story where the thing that didn't happen did happen. And that sat on me and sat with me and sat with me. And finally, I did write, and that's actually Heller's Tale. And once you start making shit up, it's hard to stop, because it's so much easier to write about stuff that didn't actually happen than to stick with what actually did. So I'm going to read a story now, and here's the problem: is I can't decide which one to read. I was figuring I'd have to do something Antarctic-ish, because Antarctica. But I could also do something that's local. It's funny and a little bit bitter. Nobody dies. Nostalgic. The raining fire ants one. That's or sweet and morbid, where people do die. I don't know. I think I'm gonna just go with Antarctica. Okay. Okay. This one's called Artifacts. And I've got my reading glasses on. Okay. Actually, let me just, before I dive into this, most of my stories start with those first lines. I just write something down as just to get a sentence on the page, and I have no idea what it means. And I spend the rest of the story trying to figure out what that means. Like the fire ants thing, when I wrote that, I had no idea what it meant. So again, we're going to dive into first lines that aren't quite so drastic as the ones I've given you before. But again, when I wrote this first sentence, I had no idea what it meant. It was pretty obvious that the girls thought I shouldn't have those bowls, and I wasn't at all sure they were wrong. They, the bulls, had arrived down at the station under circumstances that weren't entirely official. Come to think of it, so had the girls. But the bulls arrived in a long wooden crate with some sorts of machinery, honestly, it could have been tractor parts, that came down from Ushuaia. There were the official parts listed on the manifest, the usual dunnage, and then stuffed under some of the padding, the bowls. On some other planet, they could have been tractor parts too, I suppose. They reminded me of Navajo pottery, but looked like they'd been carved from spun metal instead of clay, which meant maybe they weren't bowls at all. I'd been meaning to look up the definition, if only so I could tell the story right. Well, whatever they were going to get checked out on the berms once the folks from logistics got their parts out, so I took them, put them on the shelf of my bunk to brighten it up a bit, put them next to the dream catcher my little girl had given me before I deployed out there. When the sun came around to my side of J95, it came through the window and glinted, threw the light around to little tiny spots on green canvas like stars in my own personal planetarium. I forgot I actually have a slide of context just for where we are. I missed the stars, still missed getting them every night. Another month here at the South Pole and the sun would be gone, and then of course we'd have 6 months of stars, non-stop, and I'd miss the sun. Okay, closer to 4.5 months. Twilight on either end would make up the difference. But when telling people about how things were here at the pole, we all simplified it. 6 months of day, 1 sunset, then 6 months of night, and a single sunrise. Repeat ad infinitum until the Herc comes and gets you for redeployment. Anyhow, the bowls. I'd had them for a couple of months now, and they'd sort of become part of the background for me. There were 3 of them, 1 big and 2 little, and they'd nest if you slid them together just right. They had a dull finish like old aluminum, and instead of painted decorations, there were swirling patterns cut out from the sides. A mountain with the sun behind it, some lightning bolts, a man, and a stylized running bird whose tail stretched halfway around the midpoint of the largest one. I'd had them up there in the shelf since, when was it? Probably December, but no one had been in my bunk since then. Come to think of it, no one but me had been in my bunk since November when Michelle left a bar of kiwi chocolate she'd brought in from Scott Base on my pillow, as a thank you for fixing her computer. There weren't a lot of places to be alone on station, so you tended not to mess with other people's bunks. But there'd been some sort of problem with the cooling recirc in our pod. Funny how even down here you needed a cooling loop, and when the UTs fixed it, they knocked out a couple of overhead panels. So I filed a ticket for a carp to put up the panels back in, and the carp brought the girls. It was still strange to think of families living down here. I suppose it was strange to them too. All part of the new now, we were doing our best to, as they say, embrace the change. Anyhow, the girls were fine. I'm sure they had names, but they never spoke. Well, almost, and at least not to anyone except each other. And when they did, it was in their own language. Their mother had come down from some small village along the spine of Patagonia, down with the most recent wave. She'd gotten work as a welder on one of the vessels. Apparently she was phenomenal with metal. Then made her way south until there wasn't anywhere farther to go, and the girls came with her. Somehow, when they got to station, the girls latched onto L2 as a surrogate hen and followed her around instead. L2, her real name was Laura, but down here I guess we tend to lose track of the names our parents gave us. When she'd showed up at the carp shop last season, they already had a Laura, also a carpenter, so for a while she was other Laura and then Laura 2 before her name settled on the present 2-letter form. It wasn't a big thing. I could think of half a dozen folks that I only knew by something their own mothers wouldn't recognize. Storm, Froggy, Mutt. In any case, as I said, I'm sure the girls had names, but they just seemed like L2's unlikely adopted brood as they followed, and we all called them the girls. Straight black hair framing little round faces under their hand-knit trios. I thought the older one couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, but I never was good at telling ages of mountain folk, and those wide dark eyes made theirs even harder to guess. So, L2 was standing on the ladder, poking her head up through where the broken ceiling panel was supposed to be, and the girls were bouncing on my bed, chattering at each other. They'd tumbled into my bunk when L2 had knocked, pushed past me, started sniffing and scouting every corner of my little 6x8 wedge like puppies let off the leash. Sorry, do you mind? L2 gestured towards the girls with an air of resignation, like there was nothing she could do about it. There probably wasn't. Nah, it's fine. I didn't have anywhere better to be, so I watched as she set up the ladder and started poking around the ceiling. Watched her, watched them. I figured I ought to try and be a good host and reach for a box of gumdrops I'd picked up from a beaker who'd left early in the season. Hey girls, want a gumdrop? They looked at me briefly, with the expressions you might find on the faces of zoo patrons who have just watched a seal bark, and then resumed their play. Hey, here. I pulled one out through it. The elder one caught it, unwrapped the gooey blob and sniffed at it, handed it to her sister. She considered me again for a moment, trying to determine whether a second gumdrop would be coming, then turned back to the task of bouncing on the bed. Okay, here's another. She caught this one, almost without looking, and stuffed it into the pocket of her dress. I could have just left well enough alone, but this felt like a challenge. And well, Sundays were slow days. Hey, girls, let me show you something. I thought of the Navajo-like motifs on the bowls, reached up to where the top shelf hid them from below. There was a high, brief, piercing shriek. When I looked back down, the girls had pressed themselves flat against the plywood partition and slid as far away from me as they could, eyes fixed in something close to terror on the bowl in my hand. L2 had ducked her head back down from the overhead space and was crouched at the top of the ladder. Jesus, Carl, what the hell did you do? I looked back and forth between her and the girls. Sorry. Nothing, really. I just wanted to show them the bowls I saved from getting burned. Well, don't. Christ, can't you see they're freaking out? I see. But I don't know why they're freaking. So look, they're just metal bowls I found. See? I held up the smallest one so she could examine it and watched the girl's eyes track it the way you'd watch a snake moving through the grass. They're nice. Where did you get them? No, wait. Put them away. The girls are freaked. I took the bowl back, moving slowly, smiling as reassuringly as I could as I nested the bowls inside each other, lifted the stack to place in a drawer at my feet. There was a brief stampede of small feet, and when I turned to look again, the girls were gone. L2 regarded me with interest. Well, that was something. I figured I'd track their mother down that evening to apologize for whatever it was I'd done. She was a day sleeper, though, welding on the night shift. So she wouldn't be up until dinner. L2 had told me her name half a dozen times, but I still couldn't get it right. Iketa, she'd said, but all I could ever remember was equator. I finally asked her to write it down. Yeah. I'd find Iketa at the galley at dinner time. But it was about half an hour later that Carter came knocking on my door. Now, I don't think I'd ever seen Dan Carter out in the Jamesways of his own free will. Like most of the station's senior management, he kept to the warmth of the station when he wasn't out in the field making his rounds. Carter's primary job was physical security, which didn't involve theft and petty indiscretion so much as it involved preventing folks from hurting themselves or others in stupid ways. Someone nicked your boots from the locker room, he'd put up a notice on the bulletin board. Someone set up a jet fuel-powered hibachi in the smoker's lounge. Now that was his bread and butter. So having Dan Carter at my door on a Sunday afternoon was cause for at least a little alarm. Here to check out the carp's handiwork. Finally got something in that resembles the ceiling again. Sorry, Carl, this is business. I understand you're keeping some sort of demon artifacts here? He paused. It was a measured pause, calculated to gauge my surprise before continuing. Yeah, that's what I thought. Sorry to bother you, but Ikeda came at me like I'd tried to feed her kids to the Rodwell. I mean, Megan was doing the translating. You know my Spanish is crap. But the gist was you had some sort of machine or device here that was a danger to them, and the whole station, by the sound of it. You have any idea what she's talking about? I showed him the bowls and told him the story of how I'd ended up with them. He admitted he had no better idea what they were than I did. You've checked they're not radioactive. Why would I have done that? Mysterious metal object showing up. Who knows where they're from? They're out of a USAP crate shipped from Ushuaia. The entire continent's nuke-free. Don't they check that sort of thing when they let stuff on board? I suppose. Do you even have a Geiger counter? Does anyone here? Point taken. But look, these things are freaking Ikeda out. Honestly, I think they're fine, and you're not doing anything to endanger anyone in the life and limb category. But wherever she comes from, they've probably got some pretty deep-rooted superstitions, and these things have kind of snapped her mousetrap. You're well in your rights to keep them, but I'd take it as a kindness to Ikeda if you'd consider shipping them back home. Or at the very least, telling her you were shipping them back home and making a good show of it. Could you do that for me? I said I would, and he said he owed me a beer for the favor and said goodbye. I figured I'd still catch Ikeda at the galley and apologize for causing her kids grief. I could pick up a shipping box and some packing tape from cargo at the same time and have the devil bowls on an outbound Herc by tomorrow afternoon. Shipping them to my brother seemed like the obvious thing. Not because of the devil thing, but because over the years, his garage had ended up storing most of the useless crap I acquired when it was no longer practical to drag around the world with me. So I threw the bowls in my knapsack, stepped into my bunny boots, and pushed out through the front door of J95. It's the front door there of a Jamesway tent. Stepped out through the front door of J95. Ikeda was there waiting for me. Well, not quite waiting, more like preparing. She'd carved deep gouges in the ice surrounding the entrance and filled them with bits of scrap metal. The effect was that of a miniature Nazca lines painting, spirals and pictograms cut in a half circle surrounding the door, brought into relief by handfuls of washers, bent wires, and machine screws. You stop. Her voice was authoritative, commanding, with a raised palm outstretched like an old-fashioned policeman. She was a small brown woman with heavy rope of thick black hair that she wore braided and tied back behind her, but she spoke with a conviction that stopped me in my tracks. Hey, sorry, I was meaning to come and find you and apologize for the trouble. Carter told me I'm getting rid of the bulls. I knew she didn't speak English, but I had to say something, and I was hoping my posture and conciliatory tone would get the message across. You stop! She said it again like a magic spell, whose words had no meaning to her, but held someone's promise that if uttered in the right tone, would produce the desired result. Yes, 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 I'm stopping, but I'm getting rid of the bulls. See, I got them right here in my bag. I patted my bag over my shoulder to add emphasis, and as I did, her eyes grew wide in terror. Her next, "You stop!" was not so much the voice of authority, but almost screamed, loud enough that the doors slammed open on J93 next door. A couple of husky firemen burst out at a run to stop what they could only assume was some violent assault. I dropped the bag at my feet, arms outstretched. Her eyes followed the bag as it fell, and the bulls emitted a muffled, bell-like clang when they hit the ground. By now, Mike was between us, sizing me up as an unlikely assailant, but still using his fire chief's command and control voice. What happened here, Carl? He was in my face, ready to grab, tackle me, whatever was needed. It's okay, it's okay. Apparently I've got something in my bag that freaks her out. I was telling her that I was getting rid of it, and well, she freaked out. What is it? But he didn't wait for an answer and turned to where Jake was already trying to calm Ikeda and assess whether there'd been any actual harm. It's when he looked down and saw the lines of metal drawn in the snow. He turned back to me. What the? Did you do this? No, I've got these metal bowls I found. Carter told me they freaked Ikeda out and her kids out, so I was going over to the station to get some boxes to ship them out. I came out the door and she was here with all this ice voodoo, yelling at me to stop. Honest, I'm just as confused as you are. Ikeda was talking fast to Jake, pantomiming a pushing motion directed at my dropped knapsack and the bowls it contained. Mike, you speak Spanish. I'm kind of limited here, and she's going crazy fast. None of us did, other than the usual, una cerveza, por favor. So Mike called for someone in the now assembled crowd to go find L2, Megan, or someone who could translate. In the meantime, it became clear that it wasn't me that Ikeda had the problem with. It was whatever was in my bag. And as I stepped clear of the half circle of snow drawing, she shook her head and gestured for me to go back and put them away. Sorry. to go back inside, to take the bowls and put them away. Who wrote this stuff? Fine. I nodded in assent, scooped up the bag, and retreated back into the darkness of J95. Once inside, I slid the drawer out under my bed, dumped the bowls away, and pushed the drawer back with my foot. I came out holding the bag up, open and empty, as though I were leaving the target of a police siege and wanted to assure the assembled SWAT team that I was carrying no armaments or explosives. Someone had fetched Carter in the meantime, with Megan in tow, and the rest of the crowd had mostly dispersed, but Ikeda still stood there like a defiant sentry at the edge of the carved rings, and the firefighters were absent-mindedly digging the toes of their boots into the ice. Carter was out of breath from running. He looked back and forth between me and Ikeda, sizing up the situation before speaking. Okay, it sounds like Operation Get Rid of Devil Bulls didn't go as smoothly as I'd hoped. Anyone want to fill me in on what happened? Megan translated his question, and Ikeda burst into a river of Spanish, gesturing wildly at me at J95 and at the rings of ice and scrap metal at our feet. Mike raised his hand slowly, authoritatively for attention. He was a head taller than the rest of us, and even Ikeda stopped to give him the floor. He gave, in my view, a fair and measured account of what he'd seen and assured Carter that the bowls were again secured in my bunk. Megan raised her hand. It felt a little like we'd been called out by the principal for fighting on the playground, and gave her understanding of Ikeda's account. She says the bowls have demons and that they can't be brought inside the station. She says that they have to stay inside the circles here. If they get out, they'll take her and her daughters. Carter was intrigued. She said that. The bowls still will take her? What does that mean? Where would they take her? Or why would they take her? Where? Again, Megan asked and then listened. Because she left, no, it's like left, but she's saying aterritze, which is like landed or went down. Her husband or the village or whatever. There are a lot of names I'm getting here, but she left and someone wants to bring her back to wherever she came from. Ikeda pantomimed incomprehensibly, presumably acting out what she thought Megan was saying. Pretend I'm pantomiming here. Carter put a hand to his forehead. Oh God, so it's an HR issue too. Let's go find Linda. Mike, Jake, thanks for the help. You think you can go. Megan, do you have a few minutes? At this point, I think you've got more of the story than anyone else here. We sat together in the upstairs conference room as Megan, Carter, and I repeated what we knew. Kata nodded enthusiastically while Megan spoke. Linda's Spanish wasn't as good as Megan, but it was good enough for her to ask a few questions of her own. The gist seemed to be that the bulls were sent, or as Ikeda had come to take her and her daughters back. That's why there were 3 of them, 1 big and 2 little ones. Now that the bulls had seen the girls and knew they were there, they were a problem. What could the bulls do? She didn't know. Couldn't know exactly without seeing them, but they were metal, and it was the metal in the earth that gave them power. That's why she'd come to the ice in the first place when she ran away. Ice was a barrier that kept her people's magic off. She insisted that the bulls needed to go, but they couldn't come into the station first. There was too much metal there, and they'd get loose. For now, they needed to stay where they were, out in the outskirts in J95. Carter kept shaking his head in gentle disbelief. The things I have to put up with. But was willing to go along with any plan that would restore peace to the station. We agreed that I'd bring some shipping materials back to my bunk, pack the bulls up there. We'd get Riley to print up a label for me, just guess the postage, and when the mailbag went out tomorrow morning, I'd meet her at the ramp as she handed everything over to the plane's loadmaster. No hazmat stickers, nothing fragile, just 3 metal bowls with bad juju that were causing a stink. The sky was another bluebird morning as Pole 57 landed the next day, probably the first of 6 Hercules supply planes we were going to get. I'd come down to the ramp a little early. I liked watching the planes, and Carter had given me the equivalent of a hall pass for the morning. Sorry, Bill, I'm going to be out for an hour or so. Need to do something for Carter. I felt the cold on my chin and listened to the unearthly crackling of ice crystals forming in the air, swirled up by the enormous plane's propellers as it pulled abeam the cargo shed. I'd almost forgotten what I was there for when Riley pulled up behind me in a skidoo, dragging 2 green canvas bags behind her in the banana sled. Is that my special delivery? She asked, pointing at the box at my feet. Yep. No liquids, hazardous materials, drugs, firearms, or contraband? Hey, if I had drugs, do you think I'd be getting rid of them? Just gotta ask. I'm legally postmaster on this godforsaken chunk of ice, so it's my ass in a can if you ship something bad. Frankly, I like my ass where it is. I had no idea whether that was an invitation to comment, so I just put my hand over my heart and said, I promise no liquids, drugs, firearms, or whatever else you just said, just 3 metal bowls. Okay, give me here. See you tonight. I hear Baker John's making cheesecake for dessert. From my desk in the lower level of the station, I heard the Herc depart, the heavy thrumming of 4 big engines resonating even through the thick walls. You couldn't hear them land, but there were 3 more departures that morning, and every time one left, I felt another light blanket of calm descend over me. The past 24 hours had been pretty rattling, and my dreams last night had been restless. The stick figure man from the bowls pulling at my arm, sliding flat like a shadow across the wall of my bunk, watching me. The running bird now flying, circling high over the snow, only it too was a shadow on my wall. I'd woken exhausted and had to unpack the bowls just to convince myself that they were really still there. The afternoon went quickly with menial tasks, and by the time we knocked off for dinner, I'd lost myself in the rhythm of tracing network cables and reconfiguring servers. I caught Riley in the galley as everyone was lining up for the bell. Hey, thanks for the help this morning with my mystery package. Good to have it out of here. Don't thank me just yet. You didn't hear about the mechanical? What mechanical? Your Herc had a turbine failure on launch, threw a blade, turned around, set back down here. They're fine. They're keeping it warm until Mactown can get parts and equipment delivered, probably tomorrow morning, mid-afternoon. And the mail? Oh, don't worry. Offloaded everything, put it back in the mailroom. Federal procedure and all. Can't let it be left unguarded. Wait, so it's in the station? Yeah, is that a problem? Just don't say anything to Ikeda, please. What, that your box didn't go out today? You've kind of lost me. What does she have to do with this? Some kind of reverse birthday present? I don't know. It's kind of complicated. It's a superstition thing. I promised her I wouldn't bring those bowls into the station. Well, they're all locked up and impounded as federally protected mail. It's not like anyone could get at them except me, and I'm not going to. Remember that bit about my ass in a can. Is there any way I can take the box back and keep it away from the station, like at cargo or until it's ready to go? Legally, no. What if you happened to weigh the thing and discovered that it had insufficient postage, like I couldn't come up with the extra until tomorrow? God, Carl, that's a stretch. Can't we just leave it be? It'll go out first thing tomorrow. Pretty much no one but you and me are ever going to have to know or care that it wasn't already gone. I couldn't explain why it was important to me. Maybe it was the look in Ikeda's eyes when she saw me with the bowls. Maybe it was the dreams. Please. Jesus. Okay, after dinner, after the cheesecake, find me, and we'll go indulge in your little felony. The air in the mailroom had an acid tang, the scent of something not quite finished burning. The The bag had spilled open as if slit, and there were scorch marks on the floor as if around a patch that looked like electricity had arced through. Shit, Carl, get the extinguisher. Is this your doing? I didn't think it was, and I told her so as I grabbed the red metal CO2 extinguisher. There was no obvious fire, at least not anymore, but she called an alert on comms, and the firefighters were on their way. Pieces of mail had been singed, and Riley dug through the slit in the bag for the source. It was my box, blackened and cut through on one side as though someone had drawn thunderbolts on it with a flaming rod. Jesus, Carl, you promised! They're just bowls, Riley. Carter looked at them. They're just metal bowls. By now, Don was at the doorway in first responder gear with Jake, Billy, and Freya behind him. Riley looked up. Thanks for coming, boys. I think we got this, but I'd love it if you could stay with us. Don advanced and kneeled beside her. Maybe we ought to open that up for you, Billy. Billy, keep it maybe we ought to open that up for you. Billy, keep a bottle ready, okay? Billy stood to the side, nozzle aimed at the charred box. We backed away while Don lowered his face guard, slit the packing tape away, pulled open the lid. The bowls were still inside, still nested and undisturbed, except for shreds of burnt paper. They were cool to the touch as he lifted them clear and held them up for all to see. On the side of the largest one were the etched patterns. The mountain with the sun behind it, the man with the thunderbolt. But now there was no running bird. In its place, there was an etched drawing of a woman, long black hair tied behind her with one hand held up, like a policeman, as if to say, stop. Thank you. The fun thing somebody pointed out to me is like, we actually don't know what happened. Did Ikeda, did Ikeda manage to ward them off? And that's kind of the, or did, I don't know. In any case, so yeah, when I started that, all I know is okay, let's imagine I ended up with these bowls and I had no idea where they came from. Yeah. Let's see, let me go back to my notes here. What was I going to talk about? Yeah. So yeah, let me talk a little bit about the writing process, which I have already a little bit. In all of these stories, in a lot of the stories, actually, those two that I gave you just the first lines of, it's pretty clear that chronologically, the first lines of the story happen after everything that, we sort of, after everything that's in the story. It's like, we're at some point, how did we get here? We're going to step back and just walk through. And I don't know, I don't know how other people write. I figured out how to write fiction just by writing it. I took a course with Sarah Hoteling at Stanford on practicing the basics of fiction. And the key thing on that was just write every day. Actually, one of Neil Gaiman's great bits of advice. Somebody asked, he said, "Yes, sir." The person in the back, I don't think it's anyone here, said, "So I've also wanted to be a writer. How do I get started?" And Gaiman said, "Well, depends. What do you write now?" And he said, "Mostly JavaScript." And he said, "Just write. Imagine you have 1,000,000 words of crap in your head, and you can't get to the good words until you've got those first 1,000,000 out." So there's this process called morning pages. You get up first thing, just sit and write for 20 minutes. It's stuff that's going to get thrown away. In fact, here I can show you. Let me pop over here. Do I have morning pages here? Crazy screens. Maybe it's over. Woohoo! So this is my unedited morning pages. I've just got a couple of sentences, a couple of notes on something I want to write. Here are a few paragraphs. Just most of it is utter crap, and most of it will never see the light of day. Different Jeffrey. I think it's a different Jeffrey. I don't think he survives.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. Actually, he was dead before the start of the story. So, yeah. That's a really dark one. I haven't finished yet. I don't know. But basically, I write these things and I circle back occasionally. And the goal is to do it every single day and not worry about it being utter crap. And so I started doing that, and I spent the first couple of years trying the traditional publishing route. So when you take these short story courses, there are all of these literary fiction journals where you submit, And you wait, and and you wait 6 to 9, maybe 12 months, and you don't hear anything back, and you prod them, and they say, "Oh yeah, yeah. If you haven't heard back from us after 12 months, then it's probably no." Actually, I just got a rejection from last month. I got a rejection from something I'd submitted in 2014. So this, you want to be a better writer. Okay, you're going to sit there, waiting by your inbox, waiting for, no, sorry, we couldn't be bothered to get back to you. That is a soul-crushing life. So what I decided, I followed less successfully so far the Andy Weir model. I got to talk with Andy Weir, and he describes his he's a techie guy who just started writing and putting his stories online, and people subscribe to his stories, and he quit his tech job to write full time, and he was having a blast. And he had this kind of serialized thing that some people said, well, can you put this in as an ebook so I can read it all at once? We can make a PDF. And there's the story of how that was The Martian, and next you've got Matt Damon and Ridley Scott and all. And I talked to him and I said, I like writing. I don't like this whole trying to get published thing. And he said, it sucks. It completely sucks. Put your stuff out there. And I did, and it was a revelation. I just created a little medium.com site, and I also created a Patreon page with the promise that every month I would put one new short story up online for free. If you wanted to support by pledging $1 or whatever a month, that's great, but you can read everything for free. And it was just this thing that it commits me to have something that I'm willing to show other people once a month. And it was a magnificent feeling because I put it up there, and I may only get 100 readers. Add a couple of zeros for Andy Weir there. 10,000 readers I think he has. But these are people who'd write back to me and said, I really love this part here. That was so awesome. And I've been here or there or wherever. And it just gave me these warm fuzzies and made me want to write more and more and more. And 2 years in, I'd go back and I'd read my early stories from there, and I'd go, I've gotten a lot better. And as I said, this so far, the place where the arc is right now. Last week, one of my more recent stories just won first prize in the Palo Alto weekly short story contest. Now, I don't actually just put the stories up unchecked. I have a friend of a friend, friend of the family, who's a professional editor, and she's a novelist herself. And I pay her an hourly rate. I think it's like $75 an hour to read and edit and make suggestions. And so each story costs me about $150 in editing. But we go back and forth, and and Marilyn is actually she's gotten to the, because you can write some really dark stuff. Marilyn has become sort of half therapist, half editor. It's like, and occasionally with one of my stories, Tales from the Ice, we went back and forth 5 times, and she said, Pablo, you don't really know what this story is about, do you? I said, yeah, it's a bunch of guys hanging around the summer camp lounge at the South Pole, drinking and telling stories of people screwing up. She said, no, that's not what it's about. What's it about? She said, it's about leaving. Everyone in this story realizes that they have to leave, and it's a matter of what control they want to exert over how they leave. And I looked at the story and said, oh my God, she's right. and I changed it a little bit, and it was a so much better story. It's like, whoo, like when I put that last paragraph on afterwards, it was like shivers. It was like, right. So don't, if you have a friend who you can bounce stuff off with, a writing buddy or an editor, it's really worth it. It just, but what happened about 6 months ago was Marilyn pointed her publisher at my medium.com page, and I got email from Ed Myers of Montemayor Press saying, hey, would you mind if we put these together in a published volume? And I said, but they're already out there for free on the web. And he said, yeah, I know. Okay. And so we've been about 6 months putting the book together. And it's really exciting. And I'm still writing. And I think this is the point where, and one more note before I open for questions. I don't think I have anything else. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else. Is that I didn't, So you can buy it on Amazon. You can also buy it at Montemayor Press directly at the URL on my website, or you can go to your local bookstore and ask them to order it for you. If you buy it for Amazon, Montemayor Press and I each get about $1, and Amazon gets, I think, how much is the book? It's $16.95, and Amazon gets all of the rest. If you buy it from the bookstore gets 40%, and the publisher and I split the rest. And if you buy it from the Montemayor Press directly, then they and I split it. So I'm going to encourage you, if you don't pick one up here, to go to your local bookstore and say, hey, could you get a copy? Could I order a copy of 8 in 3 Weeks by upcoming award-winning local author David Pablo Cohn? Yeah, let me just open for questions. Oh, and actually, how many people here were in my machine learning class? Excellent, right. You remember the deal with questions in the class. Okay, so let me open it for questions.
So you talked about, getting paid $1 every month by a reader, and yet multiply that by 100, and your cost is 150. So you're losing money along the way. Economically, how do you do this?
That's why I have another job. Hang on, I was going to show you some. Yeah, that's my desk. That's my desk. So I work part-time for the U.S. Antarctic program. I'm not at the South Pole anymore. I'm working on the Nathaniel B. Palmer, like 2 or 3 months a year. I've got some here. Let me do a brief commercial here. How do I get out of escape? Tab. Daemon software. Nope. Okay, there we are. And now I want to find something from PowerPoint is not liking me. Minimize that. Find QuickTime Player. Sorry, I just have to. So that's the ship. Whoop. This is a journalist with a drone who went along with us in the last. So it's a desk job. It's a hell of a good desk. Yeah, and so that's basically I'm tech support on a ship. Officially, I'm a system administrator, but in practice, what I'm doing is rewriting the data acquisition system that sort of runs all of the sensors, and we've actually convinced the NSF to allow us to open source it, so research vessels all over the world can work with a common set of a common bit of code. Okay, let's see if I close that up. Doop. Okay, next question.
So when you did the machine learning class and other nonfiction, one of the things you have to do is make things unambiguous. But when you do the short stories, it seems like you're intentionally making things ambiguous. And what do you think about that?
That's a good question. So do you want like caramel or double dark chocolate?
Oh, double dark. Yeah.
Okay. There are plenty of these for more questions. If somebody else wants to get on cue while I work on it, I hadn't thought about that. So some of my stories are. I guess what it is it's paying attention to what information the words convey and being very tuned into the nuances so that you can, if you want to be very clear, you can be very clear. And if you want to be unclear, you can basically say, warning, warning, ambiguity, and the person will actually know. So yeah, maybe it's just trying to be tuned into the nuances of the words. I hadn't thought about that before. Thank you. Oh, and I need to get
In brief, do you like actually writing, or do you enjoy more the responses to your writing?
I like, actually, I don't particularly like the sitting down and plowing through. What I like is when I get that hook. When it's sort of like when you're surfing and and you're paddle, 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 and you don't get in, paddle, paddle, and then when you paddle and you get the wave and you see where the story's going, and it's just crashing towards the end, and you hit that last line, you go, yeah, nailed it. That's the real endorphin thing, and yeah, hadn't thought about that. Cool, good question. Oh, like right. So I've got a couple of more of the dark chocolate and a bunch of the caramel-y things. Oh, caramel. Okay. I think they're caramel. Chocolate. Dark. Yes. Whoop. Anyone else? We good? Oh. And I can give you one more paragraph or a couple of more paragraphs at the end once we're done.
So you describe the way you do your short novel by having an interesting first sentence.
Yeah.
Do you think if you could invent 6 interesting sentences like that, turn that into a novel, saying they all have to be part of the same thing?
No, the problem is that I can't seem to get stuff to hold together. I have a novel that I've rewritten 4 times now, and it's just like there are these beautiful short arcs, but they don't line up. I can't get the person. He's supposed to be in Monrovia, Liberia, but the way the story goes, he's in Thailand with absolutely no. Why would he go to? Why would he go to? And these 2 people actually are supposed to be the same person for this arc to work, and I can't.
George R. Martin has a process where he rewrites every novel like umpteen times, which is why it's slow.
Yeah. But
Maybe eventually it'll work out.
Oh.
Sorry. A writer's existential question. Once you have those 8 sentences,
yeah.
how long do you think it would be before you can throw a machine learning process at it and come out with stories where it's hard to tell whether I wrote it, Pablo wrote it, or machine in the cloud wrote it?
I've read some draft novels that I think we're at that point already. I guess the question is, how long will it be before we get something where we can't tell who wrote it, and we'd actually like to read? Yes. I think we're actually out of time here. So, anyone else? Thanks so much.